Welcome to the Bogosity podcast for April Fool's Day 2013, the podcast that short sheets the bed of roses. This is your host, Shane Killian. Let's atomic wedgie the news of the bogus. In what is finally a step in the right direction, the F.A.A. has begun to relax restrictions on passengers using electronic devices on an airplane. A year from now, instead of being told to power down your electronic devices, you might be told simply to put them in airplane mode. Yes, the F.A.A. has finally got the idea that e-readers and other electronics that don't transmit radio frequencies have no chance of interfering with an airplane's instruments. The real tragedy here is how long it took them. Every passenger knows there's no way a Kindle will take down a plane. That's why no terrorists have tried using them to hijack planes. Geez, even the TSA lets them through security. And yet, travelers have been told to completely power down all electronic devices, even iPads and e-ink readers. Although for some bizarre reason, electric razors are still allowed. Lots of people, including airline pilots unions, travel agencies, and even the FCC chairman, have urged the FAA to relax its restrictions on electronics. Last year, an industry working group comprised of companies like Amazon, Boeing, and many others along with the FCC have studied the issue of electronics on airplanes. Their goal is to come up with a single, precise set of criteria for all devices, even ones that haven't been invented yet, and what risk, if any, they pose to airlines. It's great that it's finally happening, but really, it's shameful that such a no-brainer has taken this long. No device, not even fully functional cell phones, have the capability of posing any danger to an airplane or its passengers or crew. Well, maybe if you threw it at them really hard. It was old news even back in 2006, when Brian Dunning of Skeptoid debunked the issue, pointing out that no cell phone frequencies cross over into the range used by airplanes. The lowest frequency used by cell phones is 700 MHz in the US, and in Europe it's 450 MHz. Yet the frequency range for the VOR stations used by planes is 108 to 117.95 MHz. Airline makers such as Boeing and Airbus routinely test their aircraft to make sure they're resistant to all sorts of attacks, even electronic attacks. They make sure they're properly shielded and that frequencies used by electronic devices are of no threat. So really, there's no reason why the FAA shouldn't just allow all electronic devices, even fully operational cell phones, to be operated on planes, even without putting them in airplane mode. Still, this is at least a step in the right direction, and with government, I think we've learned to take all the little victories as they come. Here's hoping the trend continues. Before Congress passed the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, known as Obamacare, the president promised that this would not increase healthcare costs. Everyone who wasn't a complete moron knew he was lying. But everyone else still needs, it seems, to be beaten over the head with a stick of reality, and that's what a lot of physicians are trying to do by raising awareness of the issue and coming up with their own clever way of dealing with it. Even before Obamacare, physicians were already burdened with extensive government paperwork from both federal and state regulations, and indirectly due to insurance regulations. Obamacare is just making the problem worse, as practices and clinics raise prices to cover the extra costs, which include hiring new people solely to fill out the extra paperwork. And some of them, like Dr. Ryan Neuhoffel, are leading by example, showing the advantages that are to be reaped if government keeps their stupid, oversized nose out of healthcare. Neuhoffel charges his patients based on a standard published price list, which he keeps online. A 15-minute visit with him in his clinic is just $20. A 30-minute house call, $100. He also offers membership fees per person and per family, which includes free consultation over email and Skype. According to Neuhoffel, quote, "What people don't realize is that most doctors employ an army of people for coding, billing, and gathering payment. That means you have to charge $200 to remove an ingrown toenail." Neuhoffel's price is $50. It's not just Neuhoffel. This idea, called direct primary care, is a growing trend among American physicians frustrated with filling out paperwork and complying with hideous amounts of regulation. And they could offer a much-desired alternative to the Obamacare restrictions coming in 2014 that will raise clinic prices while reducing access to physicians. Assuming, of course, the feds don't shut them down like they have with similar attempts in the past. Can't have anyone competing with those poor insurance companies, you know. Insurance is just going to get more ridiculous. Instead of being proper insurance, what it's really becoming is a payment scheme for routine expenses. It would be like buying car insurance that covers oil changes or filling the gas tank. Or your homeowner's insurance paying for someone to mow the grass. As John Stossel effectively pointed out, if we had grocery insurance, everyone would just run in and buy steak and shrimp, making things more expensive and less accessible for everyone. Enter direct primary care. Another practitioner is Dr. Lisa Davidson, who stopped accepting insurance 8 years ago. Now she spends 45 minutes with each patient, when before it was just 15, for less money. With a smaller practice, she can focus on giving those patients quality care at an affordable price. According to Davidson, one insurance company pays $118 for a routine PSA test. Now she charges just $18 for the same test. Insurance used to pay $128 for a bag of IV fluid. Now, Davidson doesn't even charge her patients anything for those because they're only $1.50 each. Best of luck to these doctors, but it's hard to predict how much difficulty they'll face in the future when the full force of Obamacare comes into effect. Another piece of good news this week. A Tennessee state legislator has introduced a bill that would end the practice of asset forfeiture in the state. This is when police come and take your house, your car, your money, or whatever else they want without even so much as charging you with a crime. The way it works is they claim that the car, or whatever they're taking, was used in the commission of a crime. They don't even have to arrest anyone in conjunction with this crime. And they get it without you ever stepping foot into a courtroom. A few people have managed to get their property back, or an equivalent amount of money, after fighting it in court for years, but that's far from the norm. The Institute for Justice estimates that 90 to 95% of forfeiture cases never see the inside of a courtroom. In most cases, the property is auctioned off, and the proceeds used to fund the police department, or the police department uses the property itself. Tennessee State Representative Barrett Rich thinks that's wrong. Rich, a former state trooper, introduced a bill that would require seizures to be executed only with a warrant and giving the owner full documentation of the property that was seized while the police have full custodial liability. The owner would also have access to the property to verify that it isn't being damaged and shall have the right to an expedited recovery hearing. If passed, this would be a huge step in the right direction. Hopefully it will become a model for other states and the federal government to follow, because right now, all 50 states and the feds allow this practice. In the meantime, the corruption that asset forfeiture brings about will no doubt continue. Police officers have seized bail money because it had traces of drugs. Pretty much all money has traces of drugs on it nowadays, so it's a lame excuse. Police wait until drug dealers sell most of their stock to increase the amount of money they can seize when they arrest them. Even outright criminal shakedowns, where police threaten to arrest people if they don't hand over the cash. Asset forfeiture is a blatant, guilty until proven innocent practice. It's long past time it died the death. Good luck to Rich in getting his bill passed, and here's hoping legislators in other states follow suit. More good news this week. The Supreme Court has ruled that a drug-sniffing dog at your front porch does constitute a search under the Constitution. In 2006, the Miami-Dade Police Department received an anonymous, unverified tip that Jolis Jardinus was growing marijuana in his home. Now, ordinarily, an unverified anonymous tip wouldn't be enough on its own to constitute probable cause for a search, but they had a drug-sniffing dog with them. The dog's handler brought the dog up to the door, and the dog gave the alert that it had smelled contraband. An hour later, a warrant was issued, and police, together with DEA agents, entered and searched Jardinus' home and arrested him. Here's the thing. It's completely contradictory to use the results of a warrantless search to obtain a warrant for a search. That kind of defeats the purpose of a warrant. On that basis, the trial court granted defendants' motion to suppress the results of the search as unconstitutional, but this was overturned on appeal. The appeals court claimed, quote, "A canine sniff is not a Fourth Amendment search. This is the point under contention." Now the Supreme Court, guess what, in a 5-4 decision, ruled that a search was any police intrusion on persons, houses, papers, and effects. Quote, We therefore regard the area immediately surrounding and associated with the home, what our cases call the curtilage, as part of the home itself for Fourth Amendment purposes. That principle has ancient and durable roots. Just as the distinction between the home and the open fields is as old as the common law, so too is the identity of the home. Although they did acknowledge that a doorbell or knocker is an invitation to approach the door, that invitation is limited to knocking or ringing the doorbell, waiting for an answer, and leaving if none is received. Anything more is an unconstitutional search under the Fourth Amendment. So although the Supreme Court had previously ruled that an alert by a drug-sniffing dog constitutes probable cause for a search, it's invalid if they have to physically intrude on private property to get it. With so many decisions from the Supreme Court being about as predictable as a coin toss, it's at least good to get proper decisions wherever we can. Before we continue, a brief announcement. There have been some behind-the-scenes changes over at Bogosity.tv, including an upgrade to our GoDaddy account. Although as some of you found out, the upgrade didn't exactly go glitch-free, and there are still a couple of problems to be ironed out, the upgrade means that Bogosity.tv will be in a better position to grow and serve content in the future, and that includes moving the podcast from Podbean over to Bogosity.tv itself. Most of you will not have to do anything special. The feeds over at iTunes, FeedBurner, and other places will automatically switch, and should be fairly seamless. And of course, the podcast will continue to be uploaded to YouTube. But eventually the Podbean account will go away, and at that point, any bookmarks, links, and archives will cease to be valid. But don't worry, all of the older content is being migrated over to the new server at GoDaddy. I also now have a chance to give something back. You see, I've been a happy and satisfied GoDaddy customer for over a decade now. Not only are their prices good, their customer service is second to none, so I'm happy to be able to give you this special offer. Just sign up for any new domain, web hosting, email, or many other services and get 20% off by typing in the code WOWNOBOGON. That's WOWNOBOGON, because there's nothing bogus about these savings on quality internet service. Get your own domain for your email, or set up that website you always wanted. Take your small business to its own web domain where it belongs, or start that new online venture, all for 20% off, and you'll help this podcast too. Just go to GoDaddy.com and use the code WOWNOBOGON. And now it's time to deproselytize this week's biggest Bogon emitter. And this week, it's Christian blogger Mark V. Solis, who is understandably distressed that his Bronze Age mythology is rapidly dying out in the wake of scientific and rational enlightenment. So as a means of helping out his fellow Christians, he wrote a blog post entitled, Top 10 Reason Our Kids Leave Church. Here he tries to give honest answers as to why so many people are leaving the church and not looking back. Emphasis on the word tries. Ordinarily, I wouldn't care about this sort of thing, but when you're actually trying to give other people in your own religion helpful answers, it would be helpful if those answers were actually helpful and not full of delusional bogosity. So what's number 10 on his list? Quote, the church is relevant. You didn't misread that. I didn't say irrelevant. I said relevant. We've taken a historic 2,000-year-old faith, dressed it in plaid and skinny jeans, and tried to sell it as cool to our kids. It's not cool. It's not modern. What we're packaging is a cheap knockoff of the world we're called to evangelize. Wow, he is so close to the truth there. Just a little bit more prodding and he'll have a very good reason why people should leave the church, never look back, and shake the dust off the shoes as they go. Because it's going to be one of two things. Either it's going to be the backward Bronze Age barbarism we've covered so often in this podcast, or it's going to change into something so different from that religion that it might as well be something different. The phrase lipstick on a pig comes to mind. Number 9 is simply that they never attended church to begin with, which I'm calling Bogosity on simply because the title is Why Kids Leave the Church. Technicality, I know. Number 8 is, quote, they get smart. It's not that our students got smarter when they left home, rather someone actually treated them as intelligent. Rather than dumbing down the message, the agnostics and atheists treat our youth as intelligent and challenge their intellect with deep thoughts of question and doubt. Many of these doubts have been answered, in great depth, over the centuries of our faith. Oh, really? When? Where is there anything other than superficial responses to tomes like Richard Dawkins's The God Delusion? Where is the answer to the problem of evil, the argument from non-belief, responses to glaring contradictions in the Bible, responses to our rebuttals of Pascal's wager, the ontological argument, the teleological argument, and so on? For that matter, where's that plain old empirical evidence we keep asking for? He uses this as a segue into number 7. Quote, "You sent them out unarmed. Let's just be honest. Most of our churches are sending youth out into the world embarrassingly ignorant of our faith. I've met evangelical church leaders, pastors, who didn't know the difference between justification and sanctification. I've met mega-church board members who didn't understand the atonement. When we chose leaders based upon their ability to draw and lead rather than to accurately teach the faith, well, we don't teach the faith. The problem is, even when you do come forward with people like William Lane Craig who understand the faith very well, they don't do any better intellectually." Numbers 6, 5, and 4 just deal with feelings, so I think we can skip those. Number 3 speculates that many of them were just pretending and got tired of it, which is probably true, but his solution that they'd all just come running back if only they were taught the real gospel is naive at best. Number 2 is, quote, "They can't do it. They know it. All that be nice moralism they've been taught, the Bible has a word for it, law, and that's what we've fed them, undiluted, since we dropped them off at the Noah's Ark playland. Do, don't do. As they get older, it becomes good kids do, don't. And as adults, do this for a better life. The gospel appears briefly as another do to get saved, but their diet is law, and Scripture tells us that the law condemns us. So that smiling, upbeat, love God and love people vision statement, yeah, you've just condemned the youth with it. Nice, huh? They either think that they're good people since they don't do any of the stuff their denomination teaches against, drink, smoke, dance, watch R-rated movies, or they realize that they don't meet Jesus' own words of what is required. Or maybe they just realize how bogus this so-called law is. Even worse, maybe they realize how dehumanizing it is. To take so many things which are fine, at least in moderation, and condemn them as a sin is to condemn humanity itself and the natural and even healthy drives that we all have as human beings. Remember when a certain Surgeon General was drummed out of office because she had the audacity to tell the truth about how healthy and beneficial masturbation is? That's the kind of thing I'm talking about. In centuries past, this was probably a very effective means of controlling a primitive and ignorant population. This was proof that here was the devil inhabiting our very souls, and we needed salvation from the outside. But it just won't fly anymore. Not with the wealth of scientific knowledge we have about all of these so-called evils, and how easy it is to obtain that information. Science gives us what your religion never could, the ability to reason our way to understanding the consequences of our actions. Whereas religion said, don't smoke because it feels good, science says, don't smoke because you'll die painfully of lung cancer. Whereas religion says, don't drink because it feels good, science says, drinking is fine in moderation, but here are all the problems you can experience if you drink too much. Whereas religion says, don't have sex before marriage, science says, there's nothing wrong with sex as long as you take these precautions. Whereas religion says, don't masturbate because it feels good, science says, go ahead! There's nothing wrong with it, and you'll even be healthier as a result. There is just no way religion can ever compete with that. So let's look at his number one reason why kids leave the church. Quote, "They don't need it. Our kids are smart. They picked up on the message we unwittingly taught. If church is simply a place to learn life application principles to achieve a better life in community, you don't need to crucify Jesus for that. As we jettison the gospel, our students are never hit with the full impact of the law, their sin before God, and their desperate need for the atoning work of Christ." But here's the truth, Mark. The truth that you unwittingly said but apparently don't want to face. They don't need it. Not only do they not need your church to be taught how to live a good life and function in society, they certainly don't need your dehumanizing barbarism that passes for law, and they can see it for what it is. As I said earlier, ordinarily I wouldn't care about this sort of thing. Christians can run their churches and engage in their discussions however they choose to do so. As long as no force is being applied to anyone and no fraud is being committed, I'm perfectly willing to live and let live. But this is a podcast about all things bogus, and Mark, Your post was so full of Bogosity there is just no way I could let it be. If you are sincere in this, as I absolutely believe you are, then you will want to understand the reality behind the things you talk about. Otherwise, you're doing exactly what you criticize churches as a whole for doing. You're not understanding the actual reasons people turn away from the Christian faith. And if you try to get them back based on this misunderstanding, you will fail. Books from authors like Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, Sam Harris, and many others have documented the actual problems with Christianity and with theism in general, problems your site has been completely unable to properly address. Moreover, popular science books from such notables as Stephen Hawking, Lawrence Krauss, and Victor Stenger all document the ever-decreasing need to appeal to a deity for explanations as to how the universe works. Heck, just browsing around the Iron Chariots wiki will get you most of the way there. Podcasts and call-in shows such as The Atheist Experience engage in discussions with Christians and other theists directly, with questions and claims properly answered. If you could respond to our questions and problems the way all of these respond to the questions and problems the kids from your churches have, then you might actually get somewhere. Of course, there's a catch. This kind of thing really only works when your claim more closely matches how the universe really is. But as a skeptic, I say it's the process that's important, and no conclusion should be foregone. So here's hoping your side finally decides to step up its game and deal more closely with reality. And maybe you'll consider it as a wake-up call that you were named this week's biggest Bogon emitter. And now it's time to inflation adjust this week's Idiot Extraordinaire! We've covered on this podcast how the minimum wage does not do what proponents want. Instead of raising wages of lower-income workers, it puts them out of work and gives their jobs to people who can demand the higher rate of pay. Younger people and minorities are hit disproportionately hard. But now, Senator Elizabeth Warren wants to raise the minimum wage, saying it's too low. And what does she say for support? Quote, "If we started in 1960 and we said that as productivity goes up, that is, as workers are producing more, then the minimum wage is going to go up the same. And if that were the case, then the minimum wage today would be about $22 an hour. What happened to the other $14.75? It sure didn't go to the worker." The answer to that question will have to wait a minute while we cover some basics. Her comments were based on a study from the Center for Economic and Policy Research, which found that if the minimum wage had kept up with worker productivity, it would have reached $21.72 an hour in 2012. This was based on the amount of goods and services that could be produced in a set amount of time, which have increased while wages have remained relatively flat. A graph shows the minimum wage keeping up with increases in productivity until about 1970, at which point it flattens or even slightly diminishes while productivity keeps increasing. A similar finding was reported last April by the Economic Policy Institute, which plotted both productivity and average hourly compensation on a similar graph. The results are indeed similar. They both grow upward at about the same rate until 1970 or thereabouts, at which point wages mostly flatten out while productivity continues to rise. So the question should then be, what happened early on in the 1970s that stopped the trend from continuing? Warren's remarks contain the vital clue. In 1960, minimum wage was $1 an hour. If you worked for an hour, you might very well have been paid for your labor with 4 quarters. In 1960, quarters were 90% silver. According to Warren, minimum wage should be about $21 to $22 to keep up with productivity. What are those same silver quarters worth today? About $21 to $22. Isn't that an amazing coincidence? Well, maybe not. This seems to point the finger directly at our monetary policy. If we hadn't had the current policy of printing up enormous amounts of money to pay for all these big government programs since the Great Society, not to mention all the foreign wars, and if our money were still silver-based, you could indeed work for $1 an hour and be paid the equivalent of $21 to $22 in today's devalued money. And no one would have had to raise the minimum wage. You wouldn't even have had to so much as ask for a raise. Because it isn't really a raise that would have been given, simply the dollar retaining its value, negating the need to ask for raises just to keep up. In an inflationary economy, wages always lag behind prices. This is because they're less adaptable to change. Most prices can change on a monthly, weekly, or even daily basis. Some, such as gasoline prices, have been known to change several times a day. But wages? How many of you go to your boss to negotiate your pay every single month? Every week? Every morning when you go into work? How many of you stop every hour, run up to your boss's office, and negotiate your pay for the next hour? Of course you don't. So wages are always going to be playing catch up to inflation. But wait, if that's the case, why did we have increasing wages matching increasing productivity up until the early 1970s? What changed then? Even after silver was removed from U.S. coins in 1965, the country was still on what was known as the Bretton Woods system. Even though no one in the country was allowed to own gold for anything other than jewelry and gold watches and stuff like that, the dollar was still on the gold standard, and the international system that began with the Bretton Woods Conference was a system of monetary exchange between many different countries tied to the gold-backed U.S. dollar. While it was far from an ideal system, at least it was able to largely keep the problems of fiat money in check. Then, in 1971, facing bigger and bigger budget deficits, President Nixon issued Executive Order 11615, which, among other things, closed the gold window. Although he did allow Americans to own unlimited amounts of gold once again, no longer was the dollar directly convertible to gold. This ended the Bretton Woods system and allowed the U.S. to run ever-increasing budget deficits. This was on August 15, 1971, right about the time when the lines on these two graphs diverge. So we have productivity, which just so happens to have increased at the same rate as the dollar would have if it were still based on sound money. We just so happen to have a divergence between productivity and wages beginning at just the moment when Nixon closed the gold window and ended Bretton Woods. And it just so happens that the minimum wage would have covered it all, no raises necessary, with the same amount of silver that was in 4 1960 quarters. As Randall Munroe has said, correlation doesn't imply causation, but it does waggle its eyebrow suggestively and gesture furtively while mouthing, "Look over here." So, as to Senator Warren's question, what happened to the other 1475? It sure didn't go to the worker. No, it didn't go to the worker, Senator. What happened to it? You did. And all of the other 99 senators and 435 congressmen and the president, and all other congresses and presidents going all the way back to 1971, as well as the governors and chairmen of the Federal Reserve. You are the reason why this happened. You are the reason why workers are struggling more and more even as productivity continues to increase. It's all down to you. I don't know how to undo all the damages caused by the 40-plus years since the gold window was shut down. I don't know how to undo all the damages caused by 100 years of the Federal Reserve's fiat money. But I do know how to stop further damage. End the Fed and go back to a system of sound money so that politicians and bureaucrats can't spend us into poverty any longer. No, we don't need to increase the minimum wage. We need the politicians to stop stealing our wealth by printing money. And it's the fact that Elizabeth Warren handed us this data on a silver platter while not even understanding it herself that earns her the title of this week's Idiot Extraordinaire! Well, that wraps up this live or Memorex edition of the Bogosity podcast. Please visit the forums at Bogosity.tv, where you can read the show notes and join the discussion on these and other subjects. This podcast is free, but not free to produce, so please use the donate button at the top of the Bogosity.tv website or down the right-hand side of the podcast page and give generously to keep this podcast going. And if you want to donate Bitcoins, you can use the Bitcoin address in the header at Bogosity.tv. And if you'd like to contribute to the podcast, just send a question, statement, news article, or rant to podcast@Bogosity.tv. Put it in an audio file, and if it's good enough, it'll get played right in the podcast. Thank you for listening. Until next time, here's a quote from H.L. Mencken. The truth, indeed, is something that mankind, for some mysterious reason, instinctively dislikes. Every man who tries to tell it is unpopular, and even when, by the sheer strength of his case, he prevails, he is put down as a scoundrel. The Bogosity Podcast is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 3.0 Unported License. Bogosity.
Do you want answers to creationist claims against evolution? Would you like to know more about evolution yourself, or even engage creationists more directly, with actual peer-reviewed sources to back you up? My book, How Evolution is Scientific, is designed to show the basics of evolutionary theory and how it is so well supported using the scientific method. It's impeccably sourced, with references to the actual scientific material, and is arranged using the creationists' own criteria of what is scientific. Using their own arguments against them, see how evolution is scientific, but creationism is not, based on observations, accurate predictions, logic, and evidence. Get answers to common creationist claims, and even a primer on abiogenesis, the start of all life. It's all in my book, How Evolution is Scientific, available at Amazon and on Kindle, EPUB, and PDF as well. Get How Evolution is Scientific and never be taken in by creationists again.